If an avoidant is on your mind every single day, there is often a deeper reason behind it. It does not automatically mean you are unable to move forward, too attached, or emotionally weak. When someone keeps appearing in your thoughts, when memories surface without warning, or their name almost slips into conversation before you even notice, it often points to a connection that left something unfinished. It suggests there are emotions that never reached real closure. And if you find yourself thinking about them this often, there is a possibility they have been thinking about you as well. People with avoidant attachment are not without emotions. Their feelings simply move through a different process. Instead of facing emotions as they happen, they often push them aside until life becomes quiet. When distractions disappear, the pressure fades, and they are finally alone with their thoughts. Those buried emotions slowly begin to rise. That is why it is entirely possible that while you remember them every day, they also experience unexpected moments where you suddenly enter their mind. One of the biggest battles happening inside them is an ongoing struggle with emotions they never fully learned how to process. Stay with me, because what happens beneath the surface is very different from what most people expect. Avoidants experience emotional closeness in a unique way. As a relationship becomes more meaningful, their natural response is often to step back instead of moving closer. It is not because they do not care. It is because caring deeply can feel emotionally overwhelming. If the two of you shared genuine emotional intimacy, that connection did not disappear the moment they pulled away. More often, the intensity itself frightened them. Now, while you are thinking about them every day, they may also experience unexpected reminders of you throughout their own day. It can happen while driving, working, standing in line, or lying awake before falling asleep. Certain memories replay without warning, the way you understood them, accepted them, or made them feel emotionally safe without demanding explanations. Almost immediately afterward, they try pushing those thoughts away. They distract themselves, convince themselves everything is fine, and remind themselves that creating distance was the right decision. But burying emotions is never the same as resolving them. Feelings do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They remain beneath the surface, waiting for quiet moments to return. Every reminder of your absence can bring those emotions back again. They may never reach out, but inside, they are carrying emotions they never completely work through. Most people never realize how often this silent process repeats. Another important change happening inside them is that your silence is becoming much louder than you realize. Once you stop texting, checking in, or chasing after them, something shifts emotionally. Avoidants often feel secure simply knowing someone is still there, even if they rarely admit it. At first, your silence may feel like relief because it gives them space and restores a sense of control. But after that relief begins fading, curiosity quietly takes its place. Then uncertainty follows. Eventually, an uncomfortable emptiness appears that they struggle to explain even to themselves. They may catch themselves checking their phone more often than usual, wondering if you have finally moved on. The absence of your messages, your humor, your attention, and your presence slowly changes the rhythm of their everyday life. Even if they appear completely unaffected on the outside, your silence forces them to face emotions they spent so much time avoiding. Silence creates room for imagination, and imagination often raises questions they would rather not answer. They begin wondering whether you have truly let go, whether you have emotionally detached, or whether this time they pushed you away for good. Your silence quietly becomes a reflection they cannot easily escape. Don't skip the next part, because this is where many avoidants begin seeing the relationship differently. They also begin recognizing how uncommon your connection truly was. Someone who accepts an avoidant without constantly trying to fix them or change who they are often leaves a lasting impression. If you respected their need for space, understood their independence, and responded to their emotional walls with patience instead of pressure, that is not something they easily experience again. As they meet new people and continue living their life, comparisons naturally begin happening. Conversations may be enjoyable, but they often lack the quiet understanding the two of you once shared. Other people may not understand their silence the way you did, or create the same feeling of emotional safety. Little by little, they begin realizing that what existed between you was not ordinary. Regret rarely arrives in dramatic moments. More often, it appears unexpectedly through a memory, a familiar feeling, or a quiet realization during an ordinary day. That awareness slowly grows, even if fear and pride continue preventing them from doing anything about it. While all of this is happening, they often continue pretending everything is perfectly fine. On the outside, they keep working, laughing, following their daily routines, and making it appear as though nothing ever affected them. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. Instead of expressing pain, they bury it, Instead of admitting they miss you, they convince themselves that missing someone means becoming vulnerable. The problem is that emotions pushed down never truly disappear. They simply find another way to show themselves. It may appear as restlessness, unexpected irritation, difficulty sleeping, or sudden waves of nostalgia that seem to come from nowhere. Those quiet moments often reveal feelings they spent months trying to ignore. While they may never openly admit everything happening inside them, their emotional world is often far more active than it appears. This is why outward calm should never be mistaken for emotional indifference. Sometimes the strongest emotions are hidden beneath the quietest silence, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be ignored. They may quietly scroll through old conversations before closing them just as quickly, visit your profile without fully admitting why, or secretly hope you reach out first so they never have to risk rejection themselves. Beneath the independence and emotional distance is still someone who experienced something meaningful, and the final struggle happening inside them is one they almost never admit out loud. It is the battle with their own ego. For an avoidant, ego is not simply about pride. It is a survival strategy built long before they ever met you. That protective shield constantly reminds them not to chase, not to appear needy, not to risk rejection, and never to expose the softer parts of themselves that could be hurt. Every day they find themselves caught between what they genuinely feel and what that protective voice tells them to do. That is why, even when the emotions are completely real, expressing them can feel like one of the hardest things they have ever faced. Whenever they think about reaching out, and yes, that thought often crosses their mind more than most people realize, that emotional wall immediately steps in. They may open your conversation, type something as simple as, "Hey, how have you been?" or "You crossed my mind today," then erase every word before pressing send. It is not because they do not care. It is because expressing those feelings feels like giving up control. Stay with me, because what happens inside their mind next explains why so many avoidants remain silent even when they still care. Almost immediately, their thoughts become filled with doubt. What if you never reply? What if you have already moved on? What if your response feels distant or cold? Their protective side keeps telling them that staying silent is the safest choice, while another quieter part of them continues hoping that one simple message could change everything. Living between those two voices becomes emotionally exhausting. As more time passes without contact, the silence becomes heavier because it is no longer only about pride. It slowly becomes the fear that they may have already lost someone they never truly wanted to lose. Another important change taking place is emotional withdrawal, and in many cases it becomes much stronger than they ever expected. Even if they often seemed emotionally distant while you were together, your presence quietly became part of their emotional stability. Your kindness, consistency, and warmth slowly settled into their everyday life. Avoidants do not always recognize when they have formed a deep attachment, but it happens all the same. Once that connection disappears, their nervous system notices the absence. At first, they convince themselves they are happier with freedom, independence, and extra space, but little by little, an emptiness begins to grow. Ordinary moments start reminding them of you. The time of day you usually talked, songs connected to shared memories, inside jokes that nobody else understands. Don't skip this next part, because this quiet emotional withdrawal often says far more than words ever could. Emotional withdrawal rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It often feels like restlessness, checking their phone for no clear reason, feeling that something is missing while refusing to admit exactly what it is. They may try filling that empty space with work, new relationships, hobbies, or constant distractions, but genuine emotional connections are never easily replaced. Once they begin realizing the comfort you brought cannot simply be recreated overnight, the quiet ache slowly begins. They are also spending much more time questioning themselves than they would ever admit. Avoidants usually avoid vulnerability, but that does not mean they are incapable of reflecting. As enough time passes, they start revisiting situations they once brushed aside. They wonder whether they pushed you away too quickly. They question whether your emotional needs were truly unreasonable or whether they simply struggled to meet them. They ask themselves if they confused closeness with pressure. Those questions usually appear during the quietest moments, when nobody else is around. They replay conversations where you patiently tried explaining your feelings. They remember your understanding, your disappointment, and the effort you made to communicate without overwhelming them. Slowly, they begin recognizing patterns within themselves. That realization is never comfortable, because recognizing patterns often means accepting responsibility. Yet that uncomfortable awareness is often where real personal growth quietly begins. So, if you have ever wondered whether they think about what happened, the answer is often yes. They simply process everything privately. Even if they never send an apology, Self-awareness can slowly become stronger than avoidance. They are also paying much more attention to you from a distance than you probably realize. Silence does not necessarily mean they have stopped noticing. They may quietly check your social media, notice changes in your photos, your confidence, or the way you express yourself. They wonder whether you are happier now, whether someone new has entered your life, or whether you have finally found peace without them. Every observation quietly stirs emotions they rarely reveal. Jealousy may appear, not in dramatic ways, but as a quiet discomfort when they imagine someone else filling the place they once held. They begin asking themselves whether you are forgetting them or becoming stronger without them. The realization that affects them most is the possibility that you no longer need them. Avoidants often feel secure believing someone will always remain available. Once they sense that is no longer true, they begin feeling replaceable. That realization can be deeply unsettling because beneath everything else, they never truly wanted to lose you. They simply did not know how to build a healthier relationship. Another major shift happens when delayed emotions finally catch up with them. Many avoidants initially experience relief after creating distance because less emotional intensity temporarily feels easier. But emotions do not disappear. They simply arrive later. Weeks or even months afterward, longing often begins surfacing unexpectedly. A familiar place, a certain scent, a favorite song, or an unexpected dream suddenly brings you back into their thoughts. Because those emotions were postponed instead of processed naturally, they often return with surprising intensity. That is when they fully recognize what they lost. They begin understanding that you were never just another relationship. You were someone who genuinely cared, stayed patient, looked beyond their emotional walls, and chose to love them anyway. That realization often affects them much more deeply than any disagreement ever could. Finally, they begin carrying a quiet belief that the connection may not be completely over, even if no one has spoken for a long time. Emotional bonds rarely disappear the moment communication ends. If you still find yourself thinking about them every day, there is often a reason the connection continues feeling unfinished. They experience that lingering emotional imprint as well. They may never call it destiny, but they do wonder how life might have unfolded if fear had not taken control. They imagine different outcomes where they communicated more honestly, stayed emotionally open, and did not run from intimacy. During those quiet moments, something slowly begins changing inside them. They start realizing that love is not the same as weakness, vulnerability is not surrender, and emotional closeness does not automatically lead to pain. So if an avoidant continues living in your thoughts every day, it is rarely because the connection only mattered to you. It mattered to them as well. While you may be carrying longing, uncertainty, or unanswered questions, they may be wrestling with pride, fear, regret, curiosity, and emotions that arrived long after the relationship changed. Avoidants are not without hearts. More often, they are simply afraid of how deeply they are capable of feeling. If you have stayed until this moment, remember one important truth. Real healing is never about waiting for someone else to change. It is about becoming the strongest, calmest, and most peaceful version of yourself, no matter what someone else chooses to do. Sometimes they do not fully recognize the value of a connection until silence has settled between you. But that does not erase the impact you had on them. You may have changed something inside them. You may have awakened emotions they were not used to facing, and experiences like that rarely disappear overnight. In fact, something even deeper may already be unfolding. They could be starting to feel the loss of emotional security, even if they were the one who created the distance. While you may not have realized it, your love became a quiet source of comfort in their life, not because they openly admitted needing you, but because your consistency gradually helped them feel safe. You respected their quiet moments, understood when they needed space, and did not always pressure them for immediate answers. That steady presence slowly became part of their emotional world in ways they may not have fully recognized until it was no longer there. You cared for them in a way that gave them room to breathe instead of making them feel trapped. For someone who has spent years protecting themselves emotionally, that kind of patience is uncommon. Now that you are no longer as present, they may feel the absence of that quiet sense of safety. They may never describe it that way. Instead, they simply feel unsettled, less grounded, as though something important is missing. They miss the calm you quietly brought into their life. They miss the reassurance that seemed to appear naturally whenever you were around. Stay with me, because the next realization often surprises people the most. The difficult truth is that many avoidants only begin recognizing how safe they felt with someone after that safety is gone. When a person truly understands them and chooses to stay, it quietly builds a foundation of trust. Once that foundation disappears, even the most emotionally guarded avoidant can feel their world shift beneath them. Another struggle they may be facing is convincing themselves they do not actually need you. Independence is deeply connected to their identity. It is more than a preference. It is the way they learn to protect themselves. So when they begin missing you, their first reaction is often to fight those emotions. They throw themselves into work, hobbies, social activities, or anything that reinforces the belief that they are completely self-sufficient. They repeat to themselves that they are fine, that life is better this way, and that they do not need anyone. But denying emotions does not make them disappear. Instead, those feelings quietly return during the stillest moments. A heavy feeling before bed, loneliness in the middle of a crowd, an unexpected thought of you interrupting their concentration. They may scroll past your name and pretend it meant nothing. They may skip a song because it instantly reminds them of you. From the outside, they appear detached, but inside they may be struggling with emotions that refuse to fade away. Over time, that inner conflict becomes exhausting because deep down they know missing someone is not weakness. It is simply part of being human. Do not miss the next part because this emotional shift often changes everything. Another emotion that can quietly grow inside them is fear. Not fear of you, but fear that you have changed. When you stop chasing, become calmer, and stop reacting emotionally, they often notice far more than they let on. They recognize when your energy shifts, when you stop explaining yourself, and when your emotional attachment begins loosening. That change can unsettle them because the relationship dynamic is no longer the same. Before, they may have felt secure, believing your feelings would always remain constant. They assumed you would always be there. But when you become more peaceful, more independent, and emotionally centered, they may begin wondering whether they have lost their place in your heart. They imagine you healing, moving forward, and becoming strong enough to leave the past behind. Suddenly, the control they once believed they had no longer feels certain. They begin questioning whether they waited too long, whether pride cost them something truly valuable, and whether you have become someone who no longer looks back. That uncertainty creates an anxiety they often struggle to ignore because one of the hardest realities for an avoidant is realizing they may not be able to return whenever they finally decide they are ready. As more time passes, they may also begin looking back at the relationship differently. Distance has a way of softening painful memories while bringing meaningful ones into sharper focus. Old disagreements lose their intensity, while the laughter, quiet conversations, shared moments, and genuine closeness become much easier to remember. They replay the moments when they allowed themselves to open up, even just a little. They remember how gently you responded, how you supported them without expecting anything in return, and how accepted they felt in your presence. Nostalgia becomes powerful because it reminds them of a version of themselves that felt understood and emotionally connected. Eventually, they begin wondering how life might have unfolded if they had made different choices. What if they had communicated more honestly? What if they had not pulled away every time the relationship became more meaningful? What if they had allowed themselves to stay instead of retreating? Those unanswered questions can remain with them for hours. Even if they never speak them aloud, a part of them may quietly wish they had another opportunity to do things differently. Most people never see this internal reflection because it usually happens in complete silence. Perhaps the deepest change of all is the way their understanding of love slowly begins evolving. Many avoidants grow up believing emotional closeness means losing themselves. Vulnerability always leads to pain, and depending on someone eventually ends in disappointment. But when they experience someone who cares deeply without trying to control them, those old beliefs can slowly begin to crack. Even if they created distance, stayed silent, or walked away, the experience often remains with them. Over time, especially in your absence, they may begin realizing that genuine love does not have to feel suffocating. Intimacy does not automatically mean losing their identity. Someone caring deeply for them was not a threat. It was something valuable they struggled to recognize while they still had it. That understanding usually develops slowly through reflection, loneliness, comparison, and missed opportunities. But once it begins taking shape, it can quietly change them. They can no longer convince themselves the relationship meant very little. They recognize it mattered because you mattered. So if they continue appearing in your thoughts every day, remember this. Connections with real emotional depth rarely affect only one person. It is entirely possible you left a lasting impression on them as well. While you may be carrying longing and unanswered questions, they may also be wrestling with pride, emotional withdrawal, nostalgia, regret, fear, and personal growth at the same time. Avoidants do not always reveal what is happening inside them. Their silence should not automatically be mistaken for indifference, and distance does not always mean they stopped caring. Sometimes it reflects emotional overwhelm. Sometimes it reflects fear. Sometimes it reflects someone who feels deeply but never learned how to stay present once the relationship became truly meaningful. Whether your paths eventually cross again or not, do not dismiss the connection as something you imagined. You were not foolish for feeling its depth, and you may not have been the only one changed by it. If they continue appearing in your thoughts every day, it is entirely possible they have moments when you quietly return to theirs as well. Another subtle shift may already be happening inside them. They may be sensing your emotional detachment. Even without a single conversation, people often notice when emotional energy changes. When you stop reacting the way you once did, stop trying to repair every problem, and stop carrying the emotional weight of the relationship by yourself, your silence begins feeling different. It is no longer the silence of waiting. It becomes the silence of someone gradually letting go. They may sense that change more than they ever expected. To them, your silence no longer feels temporary. It begins feeling permanent. People with avoidant patterns often notice emotional shifts more than they openly admit. They recognize when your messages lose urgency, when your voice becomes calmer instead of emotional, and when you stop fighting for their attention. Ironically, that calmness can unsettle them because your emotions once reassured them that you cared. As you become steadier and stop chasing, they may begin fearing they are losing access to your heart. Inside, another battle grows stronger. Avoidants often live between two opposing needs, the desire for closeness and the need for independence. One part of them wants to reconnect, while another part fears becoming vulnerable all over again. They wonder whether they would repeat the same mistakes, lose themselves, or end up hurt once more.